Hello and welcome back. In this lecture we're going to look at bribery. So again, quite a short lecture. This is new legislation. It was introduced in 2010 and it creates 4 offences, and these are listed here for you. The first 2 we can kind of link together. They're very similar. One is bribing another person and the other one is being bribed, so being on the receiving end of a bribe or requesting a bribe. Then we have a special offence for bribing a foreign public official. Now, we'll have a look at that one. This one is introduced really to be in line with the OECD recommendations, so international recommendations to combat bribing of foreign officials. And then we have a third offence, which applies to companies only: corporate failure to prevent a bribery. Now, it's quite interesting to think about the scope of this legislation. It applies to any organisation which carries on business in the UK. May as well write that in here. So that means you could have a foreign company which has maybe a branch or even an employee operating in the UK on their behalf, and that will then bring them within the scope of the Act. However, if you're within the scope of the Act, it also applies wherever in the world, I'll try and write that properly, wherever in the world the bribe takes place. So you might have this strange position where a company that actually exists overseas, carries on some activities in the UK, perhaps through a small branch, offers a bribe overseas in respect of non-UK activities, but is actually still caught by the legislation. It's pretty onerous. So we need to again look at some of the terminology that relates to these 4 offences. So first of all, bribing another person and being bribed. We can look at these 2 together, I think, because they're sort of the flip side of each other, aren't they? So being bribed is where you offer or promise to give someone else either financial or other advantage, it doesn't have to be in a monetary form, in order to persuade them to improperly perform a relevant function. Okay, now if we look at being bribed, when a person accepts or requests or receives those advantages, again in respect of improper performance of a relevant function or activity. So before we go any further, we need to look at those 2 words that I've circled there. What do they mean? Well, a relevant function or activity is something carried out by a person in a position of trust. But you'll see there the legislation goes a little bit further. Anything public, so planning law maybe, education, offering school places, licensing law, something like that. Anything connected with business, so preferential awarding of business contracts, or in the course of your employment, and as I've said there, it needn't have a connection with the UK, we've already mentioned that. What is improper performance? Well, this is the standard that we would normally expect a person in a relevant function or activity to exercise. And it's the standard that a reasonable person in the UK would expect. So we can't sort of say, well, it's normal to expect an official in Africa to expect a bribe, because we are looking at the standard in the UK. Okay, what would a reasonable UK citizen expect to happen? Now, there's just a few other points to note here. You don't have to give the bribe directly to the person carrying out that relevant function. You might offer it to somebody on their behalf. If you give me this, grant this planning permission, I will make sure that your husband's car is serviced at a lower price than normal. Okay, the benefit might actually be for a third person. It might be, I will give your child extra tuition, something like that. And it doesn't matter about the timing either. Okay, so it's pretty wide. It doesn't matter who you offer the benefit to, who actually takes who benefits from that reward, and it doesn't matter when you offer it. Okay, we have a separate offence then of bribing a foreign public official. As I said, this was introduced in line with OECD recommendations, and this is really where you offer a financial incentive to some foreign public official to do something that they are not required or permitted to do under their local law. So you're asking them to bend the rules for you. And in order for this to apply, you must intend to obtain a business advantage as a result, either to win a contract maybe, or to retain a contract. So it's within the business world. And what we're really looking at there is things like facilitation payments, grease money, really. And then finally, we have this offence for companies. And now this offence is introduced really to put some responsibility on companies, to force them to actually put in place systems to counteract bribery. So what we can't have is a company that allows its sales teams to go about issuing bribes right, left and centre, and then for the company to turn around and say, oh dear, I told them not to do that. The company would be responsible in that situation. So this offence applies whether any commercial organisation fails to prevent an offence being committed. So this applies to employees, to agents, subsidiaries, even to joint ventures. It's huge. Now, the government have issued a little bit of guidance on this because, what about corporate hospitality? When does that become a bribe? It's pretty difficult. Now, the government have said in their guidance that hospitality and gifts are permitted if they're to encourage good relations, but not if they are to directly in respect of persuading the other side to award favours. So you might take out a lead customer, you might take those directors out to Wimbledon for the day, you might entertain them, you might wine and dine them to promote better business relationships between you and their company. But if you do that, knowing that they're just about to award a major contract, you might find that you're tipping there into the grounds of bribery because you're actually offering them a benefit in return for the new contract. Now, there is a defence for companies to this corporate failure, and that defence is that they did put procedures in place. It's not their fault they had a rogue employee who went off and did these terrible deeds without authorisation and against instruction. Now, what exactly those procedures have to be depends on a number of factors. And we're really looking at the size of the company, the level of risk. If you know that your employees are operating in an environment where they're exposed to bribes, where bribes are commonly given, then you're going to have to do more to protect them from that risk. And also, it's not enough just to put training in there at the start and say, right, all our staff have been trained, that's it for 10 years. You have to keep your systems under review. You have to check they're still adequate. You have to check that everybody's still following those rules. You have to enforce them, in effect. So you need to look at a lot of details about that business. And from time to time, the Secretary of State may issue guidelines as well to try and put a little bit more emphasis on what is required from different companies. As always with these criminal offences, it's pretty important that you learn the consequences. So again, unlimited fine and 10 years imprisonment. There's a bit of a theme here, isn't there, with this 10 years. Now, there is one more defence there, it's tucked in right at the bottom, because to be honest, for most of us, this defence is not going to be relevant. And this defence says that this is a defence for the individual offences, so 1 to 3 in our little table above. And this offence says that it's a defence to the offence of bribery if you can show that you carried it out as part of the intelligence service or armed forces. So what we're really talking about here is the spy defence. So if you're a bit of a James Bond or an undercover agent and you have to offer a bribe in connection with your duties, not just any old bribe, then you may be able to take advantage of this defence. It's very narrow and quite interesting that the government thought it was appropriate to include this in the new legislation. Have a look at this interactive question and see what you think. It's not always clear-cut, but try and look for some, key deciding words in the question to help you along the way. Now, I would say the first one falls within that category of relationship building. We're taking a partner out, we're trying to get him to build a relationship, we're hoping that in the future he'll give us some new work, some new students perhaps. We're not saying we're only taking you out if you award these students, we haven't done a deal with him, and there's no impression there in the question that he is just about to award a new contract. In the second scenario, Jack, that's pretty definitely bribery, isn't it? There's a very specific thing there. He wants a public official, but it's in the UK, so we want somebody carrying out their official duties to carry them out in an improper manner. So I would say that is definitely bribery. Okay, that brings us to the end of the bribery section. We have one more criminal offence to look at, which is money laundering, and we'll do that in the next lecture. So I'll see you soon for that one.